Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is November 4th and we have a very eventful episode ahead. So, in Russia, they've completely lost touch with reality and are threatening the US by saying they'll supply the Oreshnik systems, which can carry nuclear warheads, to the Maduro regime. What was on board the Russian military plane that landed in Caracas, how Ukrainian drones are destroying Russian factories one after another, and the Kursk region, is plunging into darkness. While Russia's foreign ministry is openly being rude to Italy, Putin is making a very strange statement, and Orbán is accusing Ukraine of a crime, but he miscalculated. This is what happens when you don't understand technology. A very interesting story. Gazprom is heading for disaster and the US is preparing for an operation against Venezuela. All this and more in today's episode. There will be a lot of interesting things. If you're here for the first time, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. So the State Duma has proposed supplying Venezuela with the Oreshnik system for a war with the United States. The first deputy chairman of the State Duma Defense Committee, Alexei Zhuravlyov, said in an interview with the newspaper RU that Russia is supplying weapons to Venezuela and did not rule out the possibility of transferring the Oreshnik system to Caracas. He stated, "I don't see any obstacles to supplying a friendly country like Venezuela with such new developments as the Oreshnik system." He also emphasized that Russia is Venezuela's key military technical partner and supplies almost the entire range of weaponry from small arms to aircraft. Let me remind you, the Oreshnik is a medium-range missile with a separable warhead. It has a range of 5,500 kilometers and can be equipped with nuclear warheads. Technically, this capability exists, so it turns out that now an official representative of the Russian Federation is stating that they could transfer nuclear weapons to the Maduro regime for a war against the United States. Unbelievable. I would really like Donald Trump to read and watch this statement. Back in the day, Donald Trump completely destroyed Alka-Hobbit Medvedev just for hinting that someone might transfer nuclear weapons to Iran. And then the bear still had to apologize. But here, Russia is specifically mentioned as the one who will hand over the nuts to Maduro. So it has become known what was on that plane that landed in Caracas the other day. The Il-76 military transport brought Pantsir S-1 and Buk M2 E-systems. And Russia also supplied Maduro with S-300s. In short, they're preparing them by the full program for war with the United States. And it turns out that international obligations do not restrict Moscow from supplying Caracas with modern weapons, including Kalibr missile systems, as Zhuravlev also added. So right now for us, for Ukraine, the more Russia sends somewhere, the less it will have left. But for some reason, it seems to me that this is just bravado and saber-rattling. At most, they'll send some Pantsir systems, so maybe they'll shoot down a couple of drones, and that will be the end of Maduro's regime. Of course, we both understand that even the S-300 and S-400 won't save Maduro. Remember, Iran had them too. And remember how Israel and the United States carried out strikes. By the way, let me remind you, a very important and interesting fact recently came to light. One of the 3 Oreshnik complexes, Russia only had 3, was destroyed the summer before last. This became known literally just a few days ago, because there was a secret operation by Ukrainian special services who successfully disposed of this 3rd Oreshnik at the Kapustin Yar testing range. So Putin only has 2 of them left. I don't know what he's going to give to Maduro. He already promised one to Lukashenko. So they've got some kind of old man squabbles going on between them. So Putin has one, Lukashenko has one, and there's none left for Maduro. It's like that well-known saying. Putin had 2 Oreshniks. He broke one and lost the other. Well, we'll get back to Maduro today. He's in some serious trouble. But for now, let's talk about the direct sanctions from Ukrainian drones, which had a bountiful harvest last night. In Russia, 2 oil refineries and 1 defense industry plant were shut down after drone strikes. The Bashkir petrochemical plant and the Nizhny Novgorod oil refinery have stopped operations, plus the Siburg-Stovo petrochemical plant, which produced ethylene, propylene, benzene, and components for explosives. The refinery that was shut down today has a processing capacity of 17 million tons per year. As always, according to the Russian authorities, everything was shut down. So, what do the local homegrown paparazzi have to say? Let's take a look. Here it is. Video.
капец, там все небо красное просто.
Thank you, young journalist. Yes, it's obvious that everything was shot down. Also, there was an explosion at a chemical plant in Stelitamak. By the way, the Stelitamak petrochemical plant is one of the key enterprises in the chemical industry of Bashkortostan. And naturally, its products are used in the defense industry complex. The local authorities? Now, this is very interesting. At first, it was reported that the industrial complex in Stelitamak was attacked by 2 drones. Both were shot down, and the debris fell in the industrial zone somewhere near the auxiliary workshop. A little later, there was a statement. This morning, as a result of the explosion, part of a workshop at the petrochemical plant collapsed. How is that possible? What kind of nuclear debris fell to cause a workshop to collapse like that? Have you ever seen anything like that? A workshop at a military factory, just imagine that. And now imagine this. The scale of the destruction, if even the Russian authorities themselves are forced to admit partial collapse of a workshop. I mean, usually when there's a direct hit and everything is burning, they just say, oh, it was a bang. But here, they actually had to talk about the collapse of the workshop. In local chats, the locals themselves are saying that the workshop is simply gone. Well, today is Unity Day in Russia. Let's wish them that all their oil refineries, petrochemical plants, military factories, and gas facilities achieve eternal unity with Ukrainian drones and missiles. The Russians really wanted Ukraine to be plunged into darkness, for us to have no water, no heat, no electricity. Yes, they wanted a blackout to happen in Ukraine, but there's one nuance. Today, the Kursk region in Russia was hit by a blackout after a drone strike. A strike on the substation put it out of commission. So, what you wish for, having attacked Ukraine and wanting to plunge us into darkness, ends up with large regions of the Russian Federation now left without electricity and possibly without heat. And this news is classic. It's just Russia in its purest form. The spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Zakharova. After the collapse of the Conti Tower in Rome, she declared that all of Italy would fall apart. And Italy summoned the Russian ambassador. In other words, she literally said, your tower that's under restoration has collapsed, and you will all fall apart and disappear if you keep helping Ukraine. And she advised them to spend taxpayers' money on something within their own country. Deal with your own affairs there in Italy. Sometimes I'm amazed. Maybe you in Russia should spend money on developing your own country instead of on the war with Ukraine. In Russia, just think about it, she laughs at the collapse of the Conti Tower. In Russia, 5 schools collapsed in a single month. 5! Because there's no money for repairs. And these characters still have the nerve to croak from their swamps. Every other day, there's a gas explosion in some apartment building over there. Who are you to tell Italy where to spend their money? What remarkable specimens! By the way, if all of Italy were to collapse, then what would happen to the 5 houses owned by Russia's chief propagandist, Solovyov, who bought them right there on Lake Como in Italy? How does that work, huh? He makes his money in Russia, but wants to live in the hated Italy. The whole country will collapse, but I'll buy 5 houses there. And now Putin decided to show his usefulness to Donald Trump and gave such an order. This is that very strange order I mentioned at the beginning of the program. Putin ordered a roadmap for the development of rare earth metal extraction to be submitted by December 1st. Wow. So you see, there was a conflict between the United States and China. They've decided to make a sort of truce for a year now, and China was putting on the pressure, specifically with the supply of rare earth metals. That's the hook China has gotten the whole world on. And Putin says, well, let's make a roadmap for rare earth metals. Donald, I can be useful to you. We'll develop a roadmap here now. Everything would be fine, but there's one nuance. Back in 2013, this same Putin launched a state program for the development of rare earth metal extraction in Russia. And the goal was set like this: to increase Russia's share in global rare earth metal production. At that time, Russia had 2%. Do you know how much they increased it? As always, negatively. It dropped from 2% to 1%, and this is something Putin started doing 12 years ago. That is, I had an entire episode where I talked about how China has almost completely taken over this sector and now holds everyone by the throat with this rare earth trap. Well, and Putin's statement really echoes the words of another one of his senile buddies, his neighbor Lukashenko, who also once heard about rare earth metals when Donald Trump started making a deal with Ukraine. And he says, that's it. Lukashenko then gathered his cabinet, his government, and said, let's look for rare earth metals here. Maybe we can be of some use to Donald. In his opinion, how does this process actually work? Did the ministers like pigs rush off to hunt for rare earth metals like truffles? Of course not. Even if Lukashenko finds deposits in his country, he won't be able to extract them, he won't be able to process them. Despite all their technological advancements, the US sends 90% of its rare earth ore to China for processing. So for years, instead of clinging to his throne with blue fingers and smuggling cigarettes across the border with balloons, Lukashenko should have been doing something else. He should have been investing in science, and then maybe he wouldn't have needed to be friends with Putin. Well, what are we even talking about? By the way, friends, let me remind you, we have an important fundraiser going on. We've almost reached our goal for the 1st Medical Battalion, for our combat medics. Right now, they have an urgent need for ventilators, artificial lung ventilation devices. We are raising funds for Falco 202 ventilators for the frontline surgical team of the 1st Separate Medical Battalion. In this case, your donation directly saves lives. Our medics save the lives of our defenders, risking their own lives. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There's Mono, there's Private and PayPal for everyone who wants to help from abroad. And I always want to say a huge thank you for this help. To each of you personally, from myself and from our defenders. Thank you so much. If you don't see the payment details, there's a QR code you can use to access the fundraiser as well. And today I received a message from our legendary Azov, from the 1st Azov Corps. Remember, we were raising funds for drones for the snipers of the 1st Azov Corps. I sent them a few days ago, and now the drones are already with them. Here's a video with their thanks to you, friends. Take a look, it's very short.
Від імені загону снайперів спеціального призначення бригади Азов приносимо велику подяку підписникам каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена за надані комплекти дронів. Слава Україні!
And Trump himself recently stated on one of the programs that Maduro's days are numbered. Well, when asked a clarifying question about whether strikes would be carried out on Venezuelan territory, he said no, these are measures intended to intimidate Maduro's regime and the generals around him. Well, generally, when Donald Trump says he won't strike, he will strike. The campaign to intimidate Maduro is going successfully. And the scariest thing for him in this situation is that no specific demands are being made of Maduro. That is, if he were given demands to stop the trafficking or something else specifically, 1, 2, 3, point by point, and he could say, yes, I'll try to comply or start making excuses. But right now, in the end, no specific demands are being made of him. The US is simply targeting boats that transport illegal substances, but no demands are being made of Maduro. This suggests that no one intends to negotiate with him. In other words, they're not giving him an alternative option. By the way, I think that on the return trip, that IL-76, which brought him the Panzer system or something else, was already carrying some of Maduro's valuables. Remember how Assad was flying out his stuff by plane? Well, this is the same thing. I'm 200% sure that if Maduro flees, he'll flee to Russia. How could someone ruin their own country like that? I'm just amazed. First of all, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world. It's ranked number 1. Just imagine what kind of country it could have been if it weren't for that dictator in power who just ran it into the ground. He put it under sanctions, millions of people left, people live in poverty, some shadow fleet is running around there. They're selling oil and so on. So just imagine, the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And to squander it all like that, literally. And just recently, this year's Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Venezuelan politician Maria Corina Machado called on the US to finish off that cockroach Maduro to free the country from the dictator, because she says there's no other way. According to reports, Maduro rigged about 35 different elections in Venezuela. That is, he imprisoned the opposition, pursued assassination attempts against them, and barred them from elections. I mean, he's a completely unhinged guy, absolutely.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And by the way, Maria Corina Machado acted very wisely by dedicating her Nobel Peace Prize, which this year was awarded to Donald Trump. Speaking of people who have completely lost touch with reality, here's another one. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has ordered an investigation into a cyber attack on the main opposition party, TISA, claiming that Ukrainians were involved. He announced this in a video address on Facebook, calling the attack on his party's mobile app a scandal that has shaken Hungarian society. According to him, when they analyzed the database, it was found that one of the administrators was from Ukraine. Let me tell you now, this is what happens when, like Putin, you don't use the internet at all and have no idea how any of this works. So basically, Orbán said that Ukrainians were definitely involved and demanded an urgent investigation. So what happened? Data on about 20,000. The information of those who were registered in this app of Orbán's party was posted online. Phone numbers, emails, and so on. I read this news and decided to look into it. What kind of terrible hack was this? What did the Ukrainians do this time? Who are these Ukrainian hackers? Now fasten your seatbelts. This is what happens when an oil toad doesn't understand technology but fiercely hates Ukraine, and also passionately loves to kiss Putin's Botoxed ass. That's what's going on. When journalist experts started to investigate who actually made this TIS party app, where you register, get some news and so on, it turned out that among the list of people who administered this app and who had access to the database that was made publicly available, there was the name of a person from Ukraine. So this person worked at a Ukrainian IT company, which, attention, helped to create and maintain this TIS party app at the request of representatives of the TIS party themselves. In other words, they hired several companies to outsource their app. And this was one of those companies. Naturally, the administrator there had access. So most likely, the Ukrainians, of course, did not hack any application, but participated in its development and maintenance. Because of this, there was technical access to user data. So the TIS party looks for a contractor company for development, eventually finds one, they successfully develop the app, and then a data leak unfortunately happens. And Ukraine is to blame. Even though only 1 out of 7 people there was Ukrainian, and there were some representatives from the TIS party itself. Basically, you yourself hired this company as a contractor, you paid them for the development, and it was your party. And Orbán presented this as a Ukrainian trace. The data of Orbán's supporters ended up online. Yeah, I don't know what causes such intense hatred toward Ukraine from Orbán. I can guess that we're simply getting in the way of him gorging himself on Russian oil, which has kept his regime afloat for 14 years. Or maybe he just remembers from his childhood how some boy came up to him and smacked him right on the forehead with something yellow and blue, with a little shovel or a bucket, swung hard, and he's hated those colors ever since. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here, we're not only fighting Russian propaganda, but also building a community of reasonable people in this world. On the main channel, we already have 461,000 subscribers and almost 15,000 on the English language one. So let's hit back at the club of old oil toads and gloomy Botoxed machos with sarcasm and irony. Subscribe. But that's not all. Orbán also stated that we cannot allow Hungarian money to be sent to Ukraine. Nitpicker 2.0 gets to work. I'm not too lazy to open up the statistics and take a look. So according to the results for 2023 to 2024, Hungary is among the top 5 net beneficiaries of the European Union budget. This means that they received 4.4 billion euros net, meaning they got more than they contributed to the budget. Do you get it? And here he is talking about Hungarian money. Therefore, according to this logic, Hungary is one of the 5 countries with the largest overall difference between what they paid into the EU budget and what they ultimately took out. By this logic, those who actually contribute the most money to the European budget, Germany, France, and the Netherlands, could ask, why are we paying? why are German, French, and Dutch money going to Orbán? But that's not all. They could ask Orbán an even more uncomfortable question. How is it that Orbán, by buying cheap Russian oil and gas, continues to be so heavily subsidized? So where does the actual profit from Russian oil and gas go? Good question, isn't it? And now for the segment, Chernomyrdin created Gazprom and Putin will bury it. Russian gas exports to Europe have hit rock bottom, absolutely bottomed out. It has dropped to the level of the Brezhnev era, when the very first contract was signed with Austria for the supply of Soviet gas to Austria. Can you imagine, in more than 50 years, this is the lowest level of gas supplies to Europe? In short, Gazprom is definitely nearing its end. Now, Putin's fans will rush into the comments and start writing. By the way, sometimes I get these comments and some pretty big bot farms join in too. Now they write, oh, we'll sell to China. Of course, you will be selling, and you are selling. But just look at what prices. China buys at $248 per 1,000 cubic meters, while you used to sell to Europe at $400. Do you feel the difference? And now China will twist your arm even more. You'll end up selling at cost. In short, there's a reason I always say that Putin is bringing back the USSR. The Iron Curtain, censorship. The West is the main enemy, NATO militarism. It's all coming back. Since then, Gazprom's supply volumes have collapsed tenfold after the sanctions were imposed. And now Gazprom has become unprofitable? Just imagine that. Do you know what Gazprom's loss is this year? Let me put it in a way that's easier for Russians to understand. 122 million rubles per hour. Every hour. How do you like that? And now, one more question. Well, since the European markets are closed, and China isn't bottomless and can't buy everything, that must mean there should be more gas left for domestic consumers, for Russians. So does that mean gas can be sold to Russians at a lower price, since there's so much left on the market? But no, and even Russians themselves will tell you that gas hasn't become cheaper for them. In fact, it's gotten more expensive by more than 10%. So, despite the drop in exports to Europe, the domestic price isn't going down. On the contrary, it's rising. What kind of miracle is that? Because for Putin's failed policies, for Gazprom's bankruptcy, for the war, who has to pay for all that? That's right, the Russians. You've probably noticed how quickly in Russia they rushed to raise every possible tax. Yes, you'll have to pay Russians. And now let's talk about Russia's greatness. Yes, we have gas. Once the war is over, maybe this will come as news to Russians, but you have a city, Krasnoyarsk, with a population of 1.2 million people, and it doesn't have gas. And there is no metro there either, even though it's a city with over 1 million people. But I looked at the statistics on promises. They've been promised that starting from 2028, there might be gasification of the Krasnoyarsk region. Do you know why? Do you know where this generosity comes from, that it will happen by 2028? Because the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline to China will be routed through there, more precisely through Mongolia to China. And they were promised that since we're laying the pipeline to China, you'll get some kind of branch from this pipe. Maybe we'll hook you up and you'll finally have gas, and the city of 1 million won't have to burn coal anymore. Can you imagine? This is what they call rising from our knees. By the way, they've also been building the metro there for 25 years. When Putin came to power, they promised to build a metro in Krasnoyarsk, and they're still building it to this day. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. Let's support our combat medics, our guardian angels. The details are in the description. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.